For more than 100 years, the Panama Canal has been more than a waterway. It's been a state of mind, a symbol of power, ambition, and reach. Now, it's at the center of a new battle. President Donald Trump thinks that the United States should reclaim it. He suggests that China is edging too deeply into Panama's affairs, that America is paying too much to use what it created, and that the future of the canal is ultimately connected to the balance of power between the world's superpowers. It's a high-stakes game because this canal isn't merely a shortcut for vessels, it's a portal to economic supremacy. A strait that joins the world's oceans and powers trillions of dollars in trade. But is Trump right? Who actually controls the Panama Canal today? And how did a narrow sliver of land turn into one of the world's most prized pieces of real estate? To explain that, we have to go back to an era of disease and death and of determination, to the dreamers who saw something so impossible and made it happen, and the deals, conflicts, and shifting alliances that still define the canal's future. Because this matters more than history. This is the story of power. And to understand why the Panama Canal is such a high-stakes issue today, we need to go back to the time before the United States ever controlled it. Because the US wasn't the first to try cutting a passage through Central America. Others had dreamed of it long before, and some had tried and failed disastrously. The idea of building a canal through Panama had been around for centuries. The first real attempt to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans wasn't even a canal, it was a railroad, built in the 1850s. It helped move people and goods across the narrow stretch of land, but it was only a temporary solution. The real deal was to have a waterway. Then came the French. In 1881, Ferdinand de Lesseps, the man behind the successful Suez Canal, took on the challenge. If he could cut through Egypt's desert, surely Panama wouldn't be a problem. But it was. Panama's dense jungles, heavy rains, and treacherous terrain make construction far more difficult than anyone imagined. But the deadliest obstacle wasn't the land, it was disease. Yellow fever and malaria swept through the workers' camps. Thousands died. Some French officials even brought their own coffins when traveling to Panama, knowing they might never make it home. By 1888, the project had collapsed. Over 20,000 workers had perished, and the French effort ended in financial and human disaster. But the dream of a canal wasn't dead. Someone else just had to finish the job. By the early 1900s, the United States saw an opportunity. It had the money, technology, and expertise to succeed where the French had failed. By this time, scientists had discovered that mosquitoes carried yellow fever and malaria. Armed with that knowledge, American doctors led a massive health campaign, draining swamps, fumigating homes, and eradicating the disease from the region. Meanwhile, engineers tackled the construction challenge with new industrial advancements. They didn't just build a canal, they built an entire civilization around it. Hospitals, cafeterias, housing, even prisons were constructed to support a 45,000-strong workforce. And it wasn't cheap. In today's money, the total cost was estimated at nearly $2 trillion, one of the most expensive engineering projects in history. But there was also another problem. Before the United States could build the canal, it had to secure the land. At the time, Panama was a province of Colombia. The US tried to negotiate a treaty to buy the land, but Colombia refused. Then, in 1903, a US-backed revolution broke out. Panama declared independence, and the US was quick to recognize it. Within weeks, a treaty was signed, but not with a Panamanian official. Instead, it was Philippe Bunau-Varilla, a French businessman who had been involved in the failed French Canal project. He gave the United States full control over a massive stretch of land, cutting through the heart of the new country. Some Panamanians were stunned. Their own government hadn't been involved in the deal, and now a piece of their land was permanently under American control. Anyhow, the US got what it wanted. In 1914, after years of effort, the Panama Canal officially opened a shortcut that would forever change global trade. For decades, the US ran the canal like its own territory. The canal zone became a little piece of America in the middle of Panama, complete with U.S. towns, schools, and military bases. But Panamanians felt left out. They saw the canal as part of their land, but one that benefited America more than Panama. By the 1960s, resentment had turned into protests. In 1964, violence erupted between Panamanian civilians and U.S. military forces. 21 Panamanians and 4 Americans were killed. The world was watching. With anti-colonial movements sweeping the globe, the idea of the U.S. holding onto a piece of Panama started to seem outdated. U.S. leaders knew that tensions over the canal couldn't be ignored. Negotiations started under Lyndon B. Johnson, continued under Richard Nixon, and finally, in 1977, President Jimmy Carter signed a historic deal. The Panama Canal Treaties laid out a step-by-step transfer of the canal to Panama, to be completed by December 31, 1999. The U.S. Senate barely passed the treaty, and some Americans felt they were giving away an asset they had built at enormous cost. But the agreement included a key condition, a neutrality treaty, ensuring the canal would remain open to all nations. But the transfer continued as planned. And on New Year's Eve 1999, the Panama Canal was officially handed over to Panama. It was the end of an era. For the first time, Panama had full control over its greatest resource. For over 2 decades, the Panama Canal has been fully under Panamanian control. The transition was meant to settle the long-standing debate over who should oversee this critical trade route, but now a new controversy has reignited the conversation. Donald Trump wants it back. He argues that Panama is overcharging American ships, that rising fees are unfair to the United States, and that the canal might be slipping into the wrong hands. His biggest concern? China. It's a familiar theme: economic rivalry, global influence, and control over a strategic choke point. But what exactly is happening at the canal today, and does Trump really have a case? Stretching 51 miles across Central America, the Panama Canal is one of the most important trade routes in the world. Instead of sailing thousands of miles around South America's Cape Horn, ships cut straight through the canal, saving weeks of travel time and millions in fuel costs. Every year, about 5% of the world's maritime trade flows through its locks, and no country relies on it more than the United States. 40% of its container traffic passes through this narrow stretch of water. It's a lifeline for global commerce, and a place where economic and political tensions collide. Now, Trump has accused Panama of allowing Chinese soldiers to control it. He also claims American ships are being charged excessive fees, and that the US should demand control over the waterway quickly and without question. To understand why Trump sees the canal as a problem, it helps to look at the numbers. Ships passing through the canal pay fees set by the Panama Canal Authority, a system that adjusts rates based on demand, ship size, and global conditions. And in recent years, those fees have gone up dramatically. In late 2023, a severe drought hit Panama, drying up the reservoirs that supply the canal's water. As a result, the canal's daily capacity dropped from 36 ships to just 22, creating massive delays. Some shipping companies, desperate to avoid waiting weeks, paid as much as $4 million to jump ahead in line. By early 2024, transit numbers were back up, but rates continued to climb. More fee hikes take effect on January 1, 2025. But here's the key point. Everyone is paying these higher fees, not just the United States. Trump, however, frames it differently. He argues that American businesses, the US government, and even the Navy are being ripped off. But in reality, US military vessels don't even have to wait in line. So, why the sudden fixation on the canal? The bigger picture is China's growing presence. The concern? That China is using its growing economic influence in Panama to quietly strengthen its strategic position. But Panama's government has strongly denied any claims that it is losing control of the canal. Panama's president, Jose Raul Mulino, has pushed back, saying that every square meter of the canal remains Panamanian territory. He insists that the waterway is not a concession from anyone, but the result of decades of struggle for sovereignty. Panama's government insists that the canal is fully independent. Officials at the Panama Canal Authority and workers at the Miraflores locks are quick to say that no foreign country pulls the strings. And they're right. But around the canal, that's a different story. Over the years, Chinese companies have expanded their footprint in Panama. One of the biggest players is C.K. Hutchison Holdings, a firm based in Hong Kong that operates 2 major ports, one on each side of the canal. This means that while China doesn't run the canal itself, it has a strong presence at key entry points. At the same time, Panama has strengthened ties with Beijing. In 2017, it cut diplomatic relations with Taiwan and officially recognized it as part of China, a major diplomatic win for Beijing. All of this has made some in Washington nervous. Donald Trump and many U.S. lawmakers see these economic and diplomatic ties as a red flag, a sign that China may be gaining too much influence over one of the world's most critical trade routes. The fear is that China could use its growing influence to shape what happens at the canal, even without direct control. Experts argue that a company like C.K. Hutchison Holdings, which manages the ports, has access to valuable shipping data. Every day, vessels from around the world pass through the canal, carrying everything from consumer goods to military equipment. Some in Washington worry that China could use this position for intelligence gathering, tracking U.S. naval movements, or gaining insight into global trade flows. But Panama's leaders reject these claims. Even China's foreign ministry has stated that it respects Panama's sovereignty and that its companies are simply doing business, just like firms from other countries. But in an era of heightened US-China tensions, economics and politics are never truly separate. And this all led to one big question: what does Trump actually want? President Trump's strategy appears to be applying pressure, just like he has in past negotiations. The goal might not be to take back the canal, but to force Panama to change its policies. It's a familiar tactic. In past standoffs with countries like Mexico, Colombia, and Canada, Trump has used strong rhetoric to gain leverage and push for better terms. Some analysts believe this is no different. By creating uncertainty, questioning Panama's leadership, and raising the issue publicly, Trump may be trying to force Panama to distance itself from China or even offer the US a better deal on transit fees. So, can the United States legally take it back? The short answer: not easily. The treaties were signed, ratified by the US Senate in 1978, and have been in place for decades. While the US maintains the right to intervene if the canal's neutrality is threatened, there is no legal path to simply reclaim it. And Panama's leaders have made it abundantly clear: the canal is not for sale. If Trump were to push too hard, it could damage US-Panama relations and create instability in the region. Some Trump supporters have floated the idea of using military force, but experts dismiss this as an extreme and unrealistic option. Panama has no military, and while the US could theoretically invade and retake the canal, it would violate international law and severely damage America's global reputation. The reality is the US needs Panama as an ally, not an enemy. And with global trade, security, and diplomatic ties at stake, any action on the canal has to be handled carefully. For now, the Panama Canal remains fully under Panamanian control. But this isn't going away. Rising transit fees, Chinese investment, and Trump's influence will all shape what happens next. The question isn't just about who controls the canal today, but who will shape its future in the years to come. And as history has shown, when it comes to the Panama Canal, power is never uncontested for long.